From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I am Kijan Haynes. Welcome. President Nicolas Maduro met with ministers on Thursday to evaluate Venezuela's economic recovery plan. In a televised address, President Maduro called the advances made positive and meeting expectations. It's been a month since the plan was launched. Maduro said the new measures will safeguard the national currency and citizens' purchasing power.
Vamos logrando un equilibrio fiscal.
We are reaching economic balance. I can safely say we are on the right path to our goal, which is zero fiscal deficit. We will achieve this faster than we had anticipated. We have reached the goal of completely stopping the issuance of inorganic currency. Every sovereign bolivar in circulation is now sustained by our country's natural resources and on taxes collected.
Our correspondent in Caracas has been out to see how people are dealing with the changes to the currency.
Here in the Venezuelan capital, people seem pleased with the first month of the new currency, the sovereign bolivar. For this analyst, you can feel the difference in the streets.
I think there's more stability and more calm. The fact is that a month and a half or 2 months ago, with the old currency and the old wages, you could buy very little in the street. Now we can see in Sabana Grande and other parts of Caracas, there are more people out in the street. They are buying more, and the whole exchange of goods and services is more dynamic.
People point to the greater supply of cash and the increase in purchasing power.
Before it was chaos. They give you 10,000 bolivars maximum. We suffer from the lack of cash. You couldn't buy a bus fare. But now at least things are moving again.
Shops have adapted to the new money without difficulty.
The difference is we are going back to work like we did years ago. It's easier to deal with the money instead of talking about millions of bolivars. I think it's a lot easier.
The head of the China National Petroleum Company has been in Venezuela to sign agreements. China has backed the new economic measures.
People
are well informed about the economic recovery program, and they have a very positive opinion about it. We signed 28 agreements in China to increase oil production, which Venezuela needs so badly.
The agreements signed with the People's Republic of China included finance to double Venezuela's oil production by August next year, support for basic industries and new mining projects, improvements in the distribution of medicines, and the launching of a new telecom satellite, the Guaycaipura. The aim is to strengthen the economy and overcome the impact of the economic war that Venezuela has suffered for the last 5 years.
And over 100 Venezuelan migrants started their own journey back home from Colombia on Thursday.
Esmeralda Rios and her family signed up to return to the Homeland Plan after suffering discrimination and hunger in Colombia.
I
would give anything to have never left Venezuela. The life of an immigrant is not easy at all. We are far from home, from our family. I trust in God and that our country's situation will improve.
Her greatest wish is to reunite with her children.
I'm beyond elated to return home and hug my kids, my mom. I miss them so much.
Just like Esmeralda, 140 migrants joined the trip from Bogotá and Bucaramanga. They all have familiar stories of being mistreated and exploited.
Their treatment of us was not kind. We didn't expect to be treated as royalty, but we at least expected to be treated with respect. I worked caring for a 96-year-old woman and her 2 children, and the best I could expect from them was to constantly be yelled at.
Entire families want to go home after being degraded.
My sister got very sick. I never imagined we would live through what we did. We had to sleep under a bridge. Our situation was horrible.
Their excitement grew stronger as night drew closer, knowing that the return was imminent.
Thousands in Guatemala have protested once again in defense of the International Commission Against Impunity. Protest action in the center of Guatemala City was led by students who were joined by campesinos and a number of social movements. They want the president to step down after he suspended the work of the UN Anti-Graft Commission and banned its head from the country.
The demand is the resignation of President Jimmy Morales because the people, organizations and communities have really realized that he has become the spokesman for the corruption and impunity of this country.
He ignores the needs of the people, acts in his own interest. He gained power by sheer luck. He deceived the people of Guatemala because they voted for him, believing that he was the better option.
Mario Rosales has more from Guatemala City.
Everyone's awaiting the response from Jimmy Morales' government following Thursday's countrywide protests. Student groups and social organizations demanded that Jimmy Morales resign after his recent actions regarding the International Commission Against Impunity. The Constitutional Court has already ruled that the president must allow Commission head Ivan Velázquez back into the country. This ruling was supported by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who said on Thursday that there is no basis to stop Velázquez from entering the country or any motivation to remove him as head of the Commission. So taking all of this together, the question of what will Morales do now remains.
Mario Rosales there. The Dominican Republic's Transport Federation, FENATRARO, has announced a 72-hour strike next week in every port. Their decision to strike is due to raising fuel and maintenance costs of their vehicles. It will start next week, Tuesday, and go until Friday. Meanwhile, talks continue in Costa Rica between the government and union leaders on the economic reform bill. Unions agreed to meet politicians after stalling the progress of the bill in Congress. The country's Episcopal Conference intervened, forcing the government to reconsider. Workers demand the economic reform be scrapped as it would raise prices and lower the taxes for the rich. There's been a national strike that's now in its second week, which may come to an end depending on these discussions. Our correspondent in San Jose, Fernando Francia, has more.
On Thursday, labor unions and the government met for 12 hours. The meeting was mediated by the Episcopal Conference. The two sides have not reached an agreement yet, although they have made their positions clear for their next meeting on Friday. These are still preliminary talks with the purpose of discussing the government's proposed economic reform. Labor unions are asking for a repeal of the current plan and that another one be drafted with their input. For their part, the government does not want to totally discard their current plan. This is the second week of a national strike, and it's likely to enter a third week if discussions are not resolved over the weekend.
Let's move on to Ecuador, where hundreds of workers answered labor unions' calls for nationwide protests on Thursday. The United Workers' Front planned to hand-deliver its proposal for economic restructuring to the president.
Protesters are registering their frustration with government's austerity measures, including reduced fuel subsidies, which will see a rise in fuel costs. And with no increases in salaries, workers would have very little purchasing power. They're demanding changes to what they say is the authoritarian approach of those in power.
Today, we, the Ecuadorian working people, across social sectors, have taken the main streets of the country to tell President Moreno that it is time to rectify the economic measures because they are hurting the popular economy of the country.
Workers who took part in the nationwide demonstration say they feel disenfranchised.
They don't condone the poor's debt, but the rich are condoned. We, the working class, are not condoned. We are demanding equality for everyone.
Unions are also proposing that the new anti-corruption law is enforced. They're calling for the assembly to take control and legislate.
We want to make clear our rejection of the Lenin Moreno economic measures. It affects the poor man's pockets. We have made our proposals, but they haven't yet been acknowledged. The system must ensure that there are checks and balances against corruption. It must be weeded out at all levels.
Labor unions say they remain hopeful that consideration will be given to their recommendations. They say their aim is to move the country forward in the best interests of all, especially those who labor every day to ensure productivity.
Let's take a break. More news from around the region coming up next.
actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Earth. Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. In Brazil, the campaign trail is heating up ahead of the October 7th presidential election. Candidates faced off in a televised debate on Thursday night. The fight against corruption took center stage in the debate. Candidates also broached each other's other issues, including labor reform and the need to change the political system. Workers' Party candidate Fernando Haddad pledged to revoke the labor law, which compromises working class rights. Haddad also rejected the freezing of public investment.
The second ethical aspect in politics is to favor the poorest. After health services home from those who do not have homes, the social programs of government should be directed for all, but specifically for those who need them the most. That is why it is important to consider the poorest and fight corruption.
And the first-time candidate for the Socialism and Liberty Party and leader of the homeless workers movement, Guilherme Boulos, also spoke about Brazil's inequality.
No family without a house, no workers without food and rights. Social equality essential for any country. Brazil is not only living an economic crisis, not only a political crisis, but it also lives a moral crisis where ethical values are the center that guides politics and life. We have to restore this, not only with words, it is necessary to do so with actions. There is a need for deep political reform in Brazil. We must face the truth that the public power is being held hostage by private interests, which are manifested in electoral campaigns through economic interests, businessmen, bankers, agricultural business, finances, elections, campaigns, and then come to collect favors. That is something we must end.
The Prime Minister of Barbados would like every Barbadian child to speak some Mandarin by 2030. Mia Mottley set out her vision as she attended the 69th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China cocktail party. Her plan is to have the language taught in primary and secondary schools, as it's becoming increasingly necessary to have some level of competence in it. Mottley will be working closely with the Chinese government on how to roll out her plans. And the Barbadian-born pop singer Rihanna Fenty has been named Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary to Barbados. It is an official appointment, which means that Rihanna is empowered to represent Barbados internationally on matters of education, tourism, and investment. Prime Minister Mottley hailed the singer for her deep love that she has for Barbados, her creative acumen, and her shrewdness in business. The Ministry of Social Development in Grenada will provide a safe house to accommodate victims of abuse. Government says they're looking to purchase the building in capital St. George's later this year after the budget is passed. The minister says they're looking for trained staff to work in the safe house. As of now, the home will be solely for girls. The initiative goes in tandem with the Special Victims Unit established earlier this week.
We will be having a special home for girls. It's a place where you have house mothers, you interact with social workers and counselors. We have seen that there are many abuse cases, and when an issue arises for child protection to deal with the issue, because there's no way to put them, sometimes you put them in the next family and they get abused again. So we have looked at that, and in our budget coming in November, we will look to purchase a building.
Consensual sex between two men is now legal in Trinidad and Tobago. In an update to April's ruling that the laws criminalizing anal sex were unconstitutional, a judge has introduced the concept of consent to the law. Where consent is present, no law has been broken. It's Hussein in Trinidad and Tobago. The largest celebrations take place in St. James, Trinidad, where people dance the moon to the sound of tassa drums. They march alongside the Tajas, which are multicolored model mosques. The tradition comes from the Muharram observances from Shia Muslims. Let's take a short break now. World News is next.
An occasion to enjoy the cultural diversity that defines our South American essence. Come along to find out the story behind these personalities, traditions, and artistic expressions that unite us as a whole. Real Lives. Saturdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. British Prime Minister Theresa May has said no deal is better than a bad deal as Brexit negotiations break down. May was in Austria meeting with European leaders who strongly rejected her plans. She admitted that talks are now at a standstill, adding that the European Union has to come up with an alternative.
Yesterday, the first option would involve the UK staying in the European Economic Area and a customs union with the EU. In plain English, this would mean we'd still have to abide by all the EU rules. Uncontrolled immigration from the EU would continue, and we couldn't do trade deals we want with other countries. That would make a mockery of the referendum we had 2 years ago. The second option would be a basic free trade agreement for Great Britain that would introduce checks at the Great Britain-EU border. But even worse, Northern Ireland would effectively remain in the customs union and parts of the single market, permanently separated economically from the rest of the UK by a border down the Irish Sea. Parliament has already unanimously rejected this idea.
We go now to Pablo Navarrete, who has more from London.
A day after being humiliated at a European Union summit in Salzburg, Austria, the British Prime Minister Theresa May has made a statement today on Friday accusing the European Union of not treating the UK with respect. Now, yesterday in Austria at the summit, she was effectively ambushed by French President Emmanuel Macron and EU Council President Donald Tusk, who rubbished her Chequers plan and called it unworkable. The Chequers plan, one of the central tenets is to create a common rule book for goods and services crossing the Irish border to prevent a hard border from appearing between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. But the European Union rubbished those plans, saying that they would provide British companies with a competitive advantage and pose a threat to the European project. So this humiliation for Theresa May comes on the back of intense domestic criticism from within her own party and from without with regards to the government's position the government's strategy for negotiating Brexit, which was, as we know, June 2016 was the referendum which 51.9% of the electorate voted in favour of leaving the European Union. Since then, the negotiations with the European Union have been very unfruitful and have weakened Theresa May's position within her party significantly. The hard Brexiteers that are represented by people like David Davis, who was the Minister for Brexit until the 9th of July this year, and Boris Johnson, who was the Foreign Minister, who also resigned over this Chequers proposal that the government adopted, are waiting in the wings, and Theresa May is feeling pressure from within her party and from within the European Union to deliver something. Otherwise there will be a no deal when Britain has to effectively withdraw from the European Union on the 29th of March 2019.
Pablo Navarrete reporting from London. The newly elected president of the Congress of South African Trade Unions, Zingwasi Losi, has called on the government to immediately downgrade diplomatic relations with Israel. She said it was a show of support to the Palestinian people and a means to pressure Israel to end its occupation of Palestine.
We call on the South African government to implement the Nasrec resolution on the immediate and unconditional downgrade of the embassy in Tel Aviv. It is now more than 6 months since the withdrawal of our ambassador. We therefore call for the decisiveness on the part of the ANC government in this regard. Similarly, we believe that our government can do more to push back against the corrupt advances that Israel and Morocco are making within the African Union.
The White House has announced that Chilean President Sebastián Piñera will be in Washington, D.C. for an official visit next week. The White House says the leaders will discuss pro-growth policies, combating crime, partnerships in energy and cybersecurity, and the situation in Venezuela. Meanwhile, the United States has imposed another round of sanctions on Russia. Alina Duarte has more from Washington, D.C.
Tensions between the United States and Russia continue to grow. Washington, D.C. has implemented a new wave of sanctions against Russian officials. Moscow called this decision a mistake, saying that the U.S.'s penchant for imposing sanctions is risking global stability and is a dangerous game. The Donald Trump administration recently sanctioned China after the Asian giant bought arms from Russia. It also blacklisted 33 members of Russia's military and intelligence units. Beijing has strongly condemned the decision and has officially complained to the United States, insisting that sanctions violate the basic principles of international relations. A representative of the Russian government said in a communique that the US imposing sanctions on Russia has become a hobby. He also stressed that the last round of sanctions was the 60th since 2011 and that every new round of sanctions only showed how unsuccessful they are.
Thank you, Alina. And that brings us to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Kijan Haynes. Thank you for watching.
Enjoy our programming from Monday to Friday, where you'll find the best information on innovation, conservation,